The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed are the speaker's own and does not represent legal or accounting advice or counsel and should not be seen as such. The material and information presented here is for general information purposes only, a conversation. We make no promises or assertions on how this information will impact your business, your personal life, or financial well-being. The information relayed does not imply endorsement or offer opposition to any specific organization, product, or services. Welcome to Shift. I'm your host, Lori Power, and I'm looking forward to our conversation. Robert, I really appreciate you coming in today and talking to me about succession planning.
All right. Well, my name is Rob Welke. I've got a Bachelor of Commerce in Finance and a Certified Exit Planning Advisor designation. I have 35 years experience in business, starting, running, ultimately selling 3 businesses. I became an exit planning advisor after I left my last business because I came to realize as a result of my experience in that business that businesses are never ready for sale. And there has to be a process behind getting them ready in order for business owners to transition out effectively. While my partner and I had positioned the business to be sold after we achieved our goals, we were not ready when an offer came in the door. So even though we had been preparing for it, we were not ready. And as a result of that, plus some economic circumstances, we ended up losing a deal from a private equity investor that was interested in buying our company. So I realized after I left my last company that, you know what, there's got to be a process. So I went on a journey to find out more about what is exit planning, what is strategic planning. Went and took some courses on strategic planning, change management, and leadership, which led me ultimately to the Certified Exit Planning Advisor program. And it was in that program where I had a bit of a paradigm shift, recognizing that exit planning is just good strategic planning, like you'd mentioned. It should be part of every business owner's thought process. But unfortunately, the vast majority of business owners aren't business trained, so they don't think of things like that. And that's where this is going to start to become an issue over the next few years, as you are as aware as well as I am, of the number of businesses in Canada that hope to transition out of business in the next 10 years. And it is a very frightening statistic, and it is a very frightening proposition when you consider that, 3 out of every 4 business owners want to be gone in the next 10 years. What is that going to do for communities? What is that going to do for our economy? What is that going to do for the employees in the businesses, their families? Because not every business can be sold, right? Even though 3 out of 4 business owners hope to leave, less than 1 in 10 sell successfully. And that statistics will likely get worse.
Well, and first thing I will say to that is hope isn't a strategy. So hoping to sell is not a strategic plan to sell.
Correct.
Would you agree that, and of course, it's becoming more and more apparent to me in the CEPA community, and when you're surrounded by the methodology and the value gaps and the wealth gaps and how it impacts employees and the customers at the end of the day, that succession planning is one of those well talked about, less understood business concepts, whether you're an accidental entrepreneur or an intentional entrepreneur. We talk about it almost nebulously, as we do when we're young and growing old. And when we're young, 40 looks old. And when we're 40, we're like, what do you mean? I'm not old.
Yeah.
So it's a bit nebulous. And, would you agree that it's well talked about, less understood?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I had an interesting conversation with a lady this morning in a meeting who reached out to me as a result of one of her advisors saying you should really have a conversation with Rob. And this lady is extremely intelligent, well educated, and she's been in business for 20 odd years and is now realizing she has to prepare a succession plan, but she really doesn't know where to begin and she really doesn't know what to do. So she's going on that journey of self-education and gaining knowledge on what things should be done. And we had a wonderful conversation, and she said to me, you know what, I've got 8 years before I want to leave this business, but 8 years goes by real fast. And that is a really interesting comment. And I thought, so true. We get so busy in the work of being in the business, we don't do anything about the business and getting it ready for the things that need to happen when it's finally time for us to say goodbye.
It brings to mind something that will really show my age. And as somebody 1,000 years ago said to me, time is like a record, the old style record.
Yeah,
You put it on, and it seems to go so slowly on those outer songs, right? And the closer you get to the middle, the faster the record spins. And
isn't
that is
that true? Yeah,
what time is like. When
very
you had
true.
mentioned about, businesses are planning their succession, but they're not ready. And you used your own example in that you had gone years of planning and making it part of the strategy for succession, but you weren't ready. Why weren't you ready? What does ready look like?
Well, yeah, that's a good question because there is no perfect answer for what does ready look like. But one of the things that I have learned after the fact is that there are certain things that need to be looked at and certain things that need to be worked on before you're ready. And we thought it was all about, okay, share structure is all set up properly, the agreements are all in place, we've got a data room, we've got some systems and processes in place, but we really didn't have the four non non-financial or intangible capital pieces that well nailed down, right? We had one of the four reasonably nailed down with our procedures and processes and our our structural capital, but we really didn't have a good grasp on our human capital side. We didn't have a good grasp on our social capital side. We had a great customer base, but unfortunately, I mean, one of the things that we learn is as a business owner and actually as a business expert is you should have a well diversified, solid client base, but many companies don't. They rely on one or two or three major clients. That's where they get the vast majority of their revenue from. But that is a huge risk for a potential purchaser. That is a huge flag.
Take me through the 4 Cs in a little bit more detail. So rather than, I'm never going to assume that anybody who's tuning in might actually understand the way that you and I do about the four capitals.
Okay.
And I think this is a really important message to go through with people is what makes a business ready significantly is those capitals.
Yeah.
Let's start with not the one that you felt you were most ready on. Let's end with that one. And let's go through those 4 Cs if you would.
So let's start with the easier ones, your customer capital, right? As a business, you do need customers. And many businesses focus on growing really good relationships with a few customers. And you have to have those. You have to have good customers. You have to have solid customers that have long-term agreements. If you can get them, really good relationships with them, you've got to foster those relationships. You've got to build on those relationships, but you also have to diversify. Because if you have more than 15% of your revenue coming from one customer, that poses a significant risk to the financial viability of the company should one leave. So that's customer capital. Second
Right.
one would be social capital. That is brand and reputation. And that is really what is your brand like in the marketplace? How well established is it? Does it have brand value? Do people know you? How have you established that and what have you done to build that brand for yourself to solidify it in the marketplace? The third one I'll speak to is human capital. And really, the simplest way to describe that is the right people in the right seats with the right guidelines, understanding what they do to deliver the value that they need to deliver to grow the company. And that is a huge piece because that's culture. My partner and I define culture very simply. It is the pattern of behaviors that you allow and you accept in your company. So if you want to build a good culture, you have to create the behaviors you want to see emulated and reinforced. And you have to reinforce them on an ongoing basis. And that drives back to core values, your mission, and your purpose in your business, your why, right? And of course, the last one is structural capital, and that is systems, processes, procedures, the manual of how do we do business here, right? And what is it that we do actually to make our customers happy, right? So it is a step-by-step process of how you deliver product, how you build product, how you uh, uh, what's the best way to describe it? How you transport product, all the things that you do and how you manage and to make sure that that is being done. And that's as simple as how do you answer the phone, right? What is the process by which you answer the phone and who does what and how is that laid out? All of those procedures need to be written down and they need to be captured. That is your intellectual capital.
And it's the governance of your company. Primarily, I would suggest that the majority of us in business spend likely 80% of our time focusing, like you had said, on just that one structural capital and thinking that that makes us ready to sell. That's going to be attractive to a buyer coming in. I'm going to
Mhm.
go back to the other three C's, but tell me first when you had that awakening where you thought you were ready to sell your business and you lost that opportunity. That must have been very raw for you to
Uh,
put all that work into play and then have it not come to fruition.
Absolutely. And part of the answer is, and this is one of the risks that people don't consider with what happened to us, is really economic risk because it took too long to complete the due diligence. So when the price of oil, we were in the oil and gas industry, when the price of oil hit rock bottom in the early 2015, we got caught in that. And everybody that was in the process of selling a company at that point did as well. But we shouldn't have gotten to that point. We should have had everything lined up so that if a buyer came along, we could have closed due diligence within 6 weeks, right? And that is having all the things ready that we talked about. And it's critically important that people recognize that, the right people in the right seats and having the right tools in place is important, and it's got to be done if you want to be successful in selling. And, running the business efficiently is it's just as important to have the right people in the business as having the right systems.
We're going to touch on your team's approach, not just as part of the four C's, but when you're getting ready to sell your business. It's so important to have those outside teams in place, and that's going to lead us into what you do on a
Mhm.
day-to-day basis. But before we get to that, I want to talk about the overlap of the four C's as well, because they don't stand alone. They don't build on one another. They absolutely do, but they mesh and marry with one another a little bit. Can you take me through that collaboration of those four C's being integral to the overall business?
So I could do this by way of example. We
Okay.
we we had a client that we started working with about 18 months ago. And when we first met with the client, it's not that there was no trust. There was no collaboration. There was no integration. Everybody was in their little silo and they didn't understand how they were supposed to work together. And this is a pretty substantial company. And they had grown over the years and then contracted because they had grown too fast. And one of the warning signs that you don't have all of your four C's in place is if you grow too fast and you collapse, because that
Right.
means you don't have the systems and processes in place to scale effectively. So really, the owner of the company came to us and said, "Look, every time I go away, I have to come back and solve the problem." Right? Somebody creates a problem, or they won't make a decision. So we ended up having a great conversation with him, and we started doing the work. And what we identified very quickly is we had to have the right people in the right seats, but then we had to give them the right processes to use to help them work together. And an execution framework and a discipline around doing work together is critically important. And so we actually helped them build a discipline of collaboration, and we built that around their core values, right? Because we identified right up front, what are your core values? And if one of the core values they had was that they wanted to operate above the line, which means they saw it, they owned it, they solved it, as opposed to complaining and whining and not doing what they, say they were going to do. So everybody on that team saw it, owned it, and wanted to solve it. So they went out of their way and they started collaborating together, because they started creating some really good systems around, okay, how do we work together? How do we communicate together? And we built the trust by focusing on highlighting the core values of the company and catching people doing the right things. And it was a requirement when we went into every meeting that somebody had to do what we call a core value shout out, which is they had to have caught somebody in the last week doing something that was aligned with the core values and then explain what they saw and explain why it aligned with the core values. And that created a huge level of trust and collaboration among the people. And 18 months later, and this I can't say that this is going to be the answer in every case, or the what happens in every case, but 18 months later, they had grown their business 60% and were not even sweating it. In fact,
Nice.
they are now top grading their clients, and they're top grading their suppliers, because they only want to work with the best, and they set some examples of what they want to do, and they set some standards and criteria and some really, really clear guidelines about how they want to operate. And if people aren't prepared to operate in those guidelines, then they can't operate with them.
It's interesting that you've keyed on two major questions. It isn't just the why we do something, it's how we do something.
Mhm.
And execution is all about the how, isn't it?
It is. But you know what? Nobody will care about the how unless they understand the why. And what we found in every and we find in every experience that we work with, if we can clarify the why and get people on the team to understand that and buy into the why, then the how easily comes along. It can easily be made, right? These guys took a process and made it into their own. We give them a framework, but they actually turned it into their own process. And we see that with every client that we work on. Everything that we do is unique to the business that we're working with. It's not a cookie cutter process. The tools that we use are a set of tools, but those tools can be applied in many different ways.
Would you suggest that when you started working with this client 18 months ago and the growth that they've experienced without sweating it, as you had said, was really part of the de-risking process?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that is de-risking. The biggest single component to a business success is its people. That is a risk. And if you don't have the right people in the right seats, facing the right direction, following the right why, you're not going to achieve the results you need to achieve to be successful.
I'm super big on communication. I don't think that will come as any big surprise to anybody. I was having a conversation and we talked about, and we always talk about this in shift succession, is the when do we inform our staff, the how do we bring the staff along with understanding that they are part of the succession, they are not an adjunct or to be forgotten part of the succession. And really, on that communication piece, it's so important from my perspective when I'm looking at succession is to say we really take a huge risk in not taking care of that communication effectively because our employees are not stupid, they're not blind. You can try to comply with the non-disclosure all you want. Body language reveals so much and our behaviors reveal so much, and if we don't handle the communication side effectively, we run the risk of losing those valuable customers who depend on those employees to take care of them. What is something that you find when you're working with employers on overcoming or reaching that balance between what to reveal and what to keep non-revealed? That's not the right word. What
But not
what
to
to,
reveal.
yeah, what to reveal and what not to reveal?
It is actually it is really subject to the company and the owner themselves, quite frankly. We position it slightly differently than CEPA in certain ways. And one of the things that we say is the owner has a plan and then the business has a plan. We focus on the business plan. And to your comment about, making the employees part of the solution, if you will, in order for most businesses to sell, they actually have to transform. Value acceleration is a growth transformation process. And part of that process is getting the right team in place to grow the business. Because at the end of the day, nobody is buying the business if there's no team to run it. So, one of the things that we do is we empower the people to become the masters of their own destiny through our process. So that becomes the business plan, which is we are going to do a growth transformation process with the business to accelerate value. And that involves getting the right people doing the right things and growing the company so that the owner is no longer a necessary requirement of the business. they're needed, but they're not necessary, right? So, and then there's the issue of the owner's plan, which is their personal plan and their personal financial plan, which are, okay, the employees really don't care about whether or not the owner gets a $5 million buyout or not. They care about their job, their future. And a, a potential disconnect saying that, look, the owner wants to sell this business and that means something's going to happen to us, then they're not going to be buying into this process. If you can get them engaged in building the company and becoming the success levers in the company, then they don't care how the owner exits because they're going to be there for the long term. It's just going to be a different person sitting at the top, right?
I
So
like that term, success levers. That's very good, Robert.
yeah,
The
and
that's good.
but that's really what we're doing is we're creating leverage through the people to create value in the business, because the owners typically have taken that business as far as they can, and in many cases they're tired, right? And we've got to get them in a position where they're excited again, if we can get them there, but we also have to get them in a position where they're thinking about not so much the day to day of the business, but what is it their next stage of life is going to be, and getting them focused on, okay, how do I make that work, and that's separate from the actual operation of the business. And that's where we differentiate a little bit when we with our growth transformation process than the CEPA process is. We try and keep them a little bit divorced. Now, most owners, when we talk to them, their people know they're leaving, right? They're 65 years old. They're not going to be there forever. And the employees are going, okay, great. What's my succession strategy now? Because quite frankly, if Joe shuts the business down, where am I at? Well, if I could create a new sense of energy in the business where the employees are driving the success of the business, then the owner's not a requirement anymore.
That is an excellent point to make for sure. And it leads us quite well into the team building, the outsourced team building, and creating that value. What's one of the first things that you look at when you start working with a company and looking at those value drivers?
Um, First thing we look at is people, quite frankly, is the human capital, because nothing's going to happen in that business unless you have the right people in the right seats. We know from change management research that the lowest person on the totem pole can actually derail a complete change process. Less than 80% of change initiatives are effective. And the reason they're not effective is because they're not well communicated, or people don't understand the why behind them, or they don't understand how they're going to benefit. So we came up with we took all the research around change management that my partner and I have seen over the years, and we boiled it down to what we call our 3M model of change management. There's 3 steps to it. First is you mandate. Change is requirement. Nobody's allowed to stay off the bus. Everybody's going to be on the bus. But in order for that to happen, you have to market it, right? Right. And really, what is marketing? What's in it for me? Why should I trust you? And why should I care? So those are the 3 questions we have to get them to answer. And marketing is all about showing people why it's important for them to be part of the solution, right? Where they're going to be, what it means for them at the end of the day. And the last piece of that 3M model is maintain. You have to make sure that you have all the supports in place before you start the process, and grow them along the way to make sure they cannot fail. You don't give them permission to fail by having all of the systems in place to support them in the success of the change initiative. So it's a simple model, a lot more difficult to implement, but at the end of the day, really, if you understand that it's really about everybody's got to do it, now you got to sell it to everybody, and it's a constant sell job, right? You cannot give up on that. It's constant. You're constantly selling the solution and the reason for it, and there's got to be a good why for it. That's the other important thing. And then making sure you can't fail. Don't allow them the opportunity to fail.
How often does the new buyer, when they're coming in and they're purchasing the business, how easy is it for them to adopt that 3M model and sustain it and keep it going?
I honestly can't say at this point, because I mean, I've only been doing this for a few years. We haven't actually sold one of the businesses we're working with, but I'm going to suggest that it's going to be fairly easy, because if a new buyer's coming in, they're going to be doing due diligence on the team, and they will see that the team has a process, and they should be able to understand very quickly that they have a methodology for making change happen. And I mean, if I were a buyer, I'd be going to the people on the team and saying, hey, if you were going to do an initiative, How would you do that? How would you integrate me into the process? How would we do this together, right? And if their team doesn't have an answer for that, I'd be worried.
Well, it's like when people are looking at whether they want to do business with this particular company, or even if you're hiring staff, one of the first things they're doing is they're looking at your Google reviews. What are people saying about you? Are you going into Indeed? You made a very valid point that the employees are the ambassadors. So if you have former employees giving bad PR, well, the new business owner is going to read that as well, and it's going to impact one of the core components of your capital and derail your selling ability.
Absolutely. It's going to devalue it, right? You still might buy it, but you're not going to pay the same price, right? The way I look at a sale is this. An opportunity comes along and the buyer offers you a price, right? Great. Now it's negotiation. It's turkey talk time. From now on, the price only goes down by what I find in your company, right? And if you want to keep that price, you better be able to deliver on all the things that you said the company was. Otherwise, that you're going to devalue the purchase price as you go along. Because really, at the end of the day, a buyer's goal during due diligence is to figure out a way to lower the amount of money they have to pay. And that's not being cynical. That's reality, right?
Well, if we take it down to simple terms, if we look at selling a house, right, we sell a house, it's a huge asset. Now, it's nothing compared to the value of your business, but you look at the preparation that goes into valuing your house prior to putting it on the marketplace. You're cleaning the place up, you're painting, you're making sure everything's been fixed, the light sockets all work, things that are supposed to be plugged in are plugged in.
Hmm.
It's spick and span and ready for inspection.
Right.
And in the whole process, then somebody comes in and they make you an offer, and you have to walk away from that emotion and say, I put X amount of dollars into my home, but I'm still in a neighborhood that only supports this much. And that's all the market is going to pay for it. Very often as business owners, because we are emotionally attached to it, that forms part of our identity. It's hard. How do you overcome that emotional involvement and to say, that is what my business is worth? Robert, stop telling me that I can only sell it for X amount of dollars.
Well, and that's where empirical evidence comes to play, actually. When we do an opinion of value, we base the opinion of value on what we know about the business today, right? And the opinion of value is a great starting point. And this is what I tell business owners. This number I'm going to give you is not what you could sell it for. This is the discussion number. And if you're prepared, you can increase that number. But if you're not prepared to do the work, that number is only going to go down. So you need to make a decision. So when we do our initial assessment with a business owner, when we start working with them, we give them that scorecard, and then we show them what the potential value can be. Because that's easy enough to do. That's when I've talked to you about this once before, and that is the value gap and the wealth gap, right? How do you close those? Well, you close them by focusing on the five capitals: financial performance, and the four non-capital perform and four C's. That's how you increase the value, because that's the way that you drive future value of a business.
I want to continue this discussion with you and how we get into a position to market the company and find the right buyer and get the value out of the business that we want to. What would be a piece of advice that you would give somebody who has thought about succession plan, as all of us do in business? We always contemplate it, but rarely act on it. What would be your one piece of advice for those that almost it's like walking by a graveyard? I don't want to really think about it. I know the graveyard's there, but I'm not going in.
Yeah.
What would you suggest they should consider?
Well, I'm going to tell you what I think now versus what I would have thought 2 or 3 years ago.
Okay.
First thing that I'm going to suggest to them is go find a financial planner, sit down and do a financial plan to find out what it is that you actually want to have for income to support the lifestyle you hope you're going to have, because that's going to determine the number you need. And once you have that number, then you have to make some serious decisions, because that is the starting point for everything. One of the things that we do with every business owner is we direct them to a financial planner first off. because we need to understand what our goalpost is down the road in order for us to be successful. I can't just go in and say, oh, I'm going to make your business worth blah, because I don't know if blah is the right number. So that's what we have to find first, is the right number. And then we've got to identify whether or not it's actually reasonable to be able to achieve that, because he may not be able to build that in a business that he has, right? So then it's a matter of, okay, what are you going to do differently? And are you prepared to commit more resources to make this happen? Because one of the things that we have found is a lot of business owners, when they get to the stage where they're thinking about selling, is they start decreasing the amount of investment. And I've actually done an actual case study where I walk through the process. Okay, I'm going to strip X dollars out of my business for the next 3 years and then wind it down, versus I'm going to spend some money on value acceleration and grow the value of my business. And what are the two? What is the difference between those two? And believe it or not, we have so much information these days that it's not unrealistic for me to be able to peg a future value of a company based on exit readiness, exit attractiveness, and the market and the industry that they're in. All that information is available. It's not rocket science. It's just mathematics.
And it's working with the right person to be able to pinpoint it for you, much like you don't ever know where you're going to go if you don't know where you are right now.
Yeah,
If I say I want to go to Europe, but I don't know that I'm in Canada, how am I ever going to know I'm going to need to take a plane or a boat?
exactly. And that's the big thing, is we need to have an understanding of some of the goals and your starting point. In fact, that presentation that I sent you to look at, that's the starting point. Where are you now? Right? Where are you at now? Because you can't gauge where you're going until you understand where you're at currently.
Excellent. Well, I would like to continue this conversation with you in the future. I hope you're game. And I'd like to, the next time we talk, really delve more into the mapping and the value and how we're going to get there and what it looks like once we've achieved the de-risking and
Right.
getting ready to go. But I
Awesome.
appreciate your time and thank you so much for having the conversation.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it. Thanks, Lori.